boş olan gruplara katılırsanız seviniriz. Çok teşekkürler.
Try that again. Can I start?
Maybe a few minutes.
Okay.
Just,
Sure. Okay, sure.
Once again, we would like to welcome everyone. As mentioned earlier, we will now have a workshop coordinated by Ms. Clark. In this 2-hour workshop, you will be introduced to the 4 essential steps of impact management that align with global standards for enterprises and investors. You will be able to practice these steps in small groups using templates provided to you. We will have a 20-minute break coffee at 2 o'clock, and the second part of our workshop will take place until 3:20. You can find the number of your assigned working group on the back of your name tag. If you are not going to use the headphones, please give it to the staff. Thank you.
Kulaklık kullanmaya ihtiyacı olmayanlar lütfen kulaklığı görevli birine versin. Teşekkür ederim.
Thank you and welcome everyone to our workshop. Come take a seat and we're going to get started. Thank you. So as we talked about this morning, every organization has impact. The question is, how do we know about them? And how likely are we to have the impact we want if we're not measuring and managing them? So I'm going to show you 2 companies. I'm going to ask you, by a show of hands, to tell me which one you think is more impactful. Company A. It's a maternity clinic in Kenya. They have added SDG 3.2 to their website and annual report. They have a nice, pretty little square sitting there. It says, "We do this." They report to their board annually, and they track longitudinal data from year to year for the health outcomes of their clinic. Okay? That's Company A. Company B is also the same kind of thing, a maternity clinic in Africa. They engage with their key stakeholders to gather input on a regular basis. They set annual impact targets. They have systems to regularly collect data on those targets. They use that data to take new actions. They reward their staff who are responsible for the impact outcomes that they're achieving, and they share their impact learnings across the organization. So let's say your impact investor, your impact fund C, and your investors have said, "I need you to invest in this SDG." And you're looking at these 2 companies, which are similar. Which one do you think has more impact? Which one should you look at? How many people think Company A? How many people think Company B? How many people think either one is fine? All right, we have one for that. So it's a little bit of a trick question, obviously. What we see is that company B has done more things in their practices to support the impact that they're having. They've aligned with their stakeholders, they've set goals, they've developed systems, they're using that data to make decisions, and they've aligned that with their team. So simply put, they have better practices in place. This doesn't mean they're having better impact, but they have better practices in place. And in some ways, that can become a proxy because you can believe the impact that they're giving you. So in a sense, both of these companies might be equally impactful. Company B is farther along in terms of setting up their own impact measurement and management systems, right? And so I wanted to make sure that we understand impact measurement and management systems are not the same as the impact they're having, but it could give us much more confidence about the impact that they're reporting to us. We can also ask about Impact Fund C because it also may need to change its practices to be a successful impact fund. Is it setting its own goals and targets? Is it engaging with the most important stakeholders around impact outcomes? Those stakeholders might not be the fund stakeholders, that might be the stakeholders of its enterprises. Do they have processes in place to use data to make better decisions over time? Are they rolling up data across their portfolio and reporting on it in ways that make sense? Are they sharing the outcomes of the work to build confidence in the impact? So this is what is going on in the impact enterprise and impact investing space, is how do we adopt these practices in ways that help us have more impact, have more confidence about that impact, and be able to communicate it with different stakeholders. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the 4 universal steps that I mentioned this morning. I know there are some people in the room who have already taken the online course. This is the crash course version. This is the 2-hour version of the 10-hour course. So if you've taken the course, this is going to look very familiar to you. It's all in there. And if you haven't, I'm hoping that this is a taste that will whet your appetite to go in and learn some more. So we have the 4 steps: set strategy, integrate, optimize, and reinforce. We're going to go through each one. And at certain points, I'm going to stop and ask you guys to discuss some things and do some things in your group. And my goal is that by the end of this 2 hours, you are familiar with the 4 steps. You've learned some of the nomenclature that has become common in the field. You have a little bit of experience in applying those 4 steps to your own work. And maybe you've learned some things from the other people in your group. Those are the goals for today. Are there any questions before we dive in? Great. The other thing I wanted to give you as backdrop, the course actually talks about the steps through the lens of roles. And the 4 roles, the 2 roles that we have in the course are I'm managing an enterprise or I'm managing an investment vehicle. And within that, we have more roles. We have Akhil, who is managing a venture capital fund in India. We have Paula, who is managing a Canadian pension fund. Paula is an investor in Akhil, right? So the capital starts with Paula. She invests in funds like Akhil's. Akhil then chooses what enterprises to invest in. And in this case, we have 2. We have Miguel and we have Grace. Grace is the CEO of the maternity health clinic, and that's the example that we're going to pull through today. I'm only going to do one because we're so limited in time. But I wanted to give you this view that we can look at the processes of going through these steps from different points of view in the ecosystem. So let me just give you a little bit more detail about Grace. She is CEO of a small chain of maternity clinics for low and middle income patients in, I had put South Africa, that's why it says South Africa there, I forgot which country it was. Her business strategy includes contributing positively to the SDGs, retaining to maternal and infant health. She wants her clinic to be known both for meeting the needs of her patients and improving health outcomes in her community. She's also aware that her clinics may generate negative impacts. She wants to manage both her positive and negative impacts in ways that respect the priorities of her stakeholders, including her patients, employees, and investors. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So let's start with the first step, setting strategy. Setting strategy is about how do you understand the material issues that are most relevant to your stakeholders, and then define your target outcomes, in this case SDG outcomes, or it can be any outcomes, in ways that align with your overall business or investment objectives. You're going to create an impact thesis for each one, and if you're an investor, you're going to integrate that thesis into your governance documents, which we also recommend that enterprises do. Part of setting strategy is aligning your stakeholders around that strategy, both internal stakeholders, such as your CEO, your boards, or external stakeholders, such as people who invest in you. And the last thing you're going to do, which I'm sure is new for almost everyone in this room, is you're going to set ABC classification levels for your goals. How many people in the room have heard of ABCs before? So very few. So that's going to be new for you. And that's one of the main things I wanted to get out of this part with the group. All right, so SDG outcomes are asking you which changes in what you're doing, in this case a company, could have either the biggest risk or the biggest opportunity for impact on people and planet. And the idea is to surface which are those risks or opportunities, who is likely to experience them, and which ones do you want to commit to managing. You cannot manage every impact that your company has on every stakeholder. It is impossible. That's why we're not one size fits all, as we talked about this morning. And the way to think about this, the shortcut for thinking about this, is thinking about it as a combination of what and who. We're going to talk about dimensions of impact a little bit later. These are two of them. The what is, what outcome are we trying to change? And in which direction are we trying to raise it or lower it? Those are your two choices. And for whom? Whom can be a gender, whom can be a segment of the population, whom can be the employees of our clinic, whom could be the patients of our clinic, and whom could also be the planet or your community. Especially when you're talking about environmental impacts, it's often the planet. But the key thing here is you want to emerge with a set of SDG outcomes that are combinations of who and what. And then you want to think about the change that you're trying to make to that. So how do you do that? You can do that from two different perspectives. I'm going to give you two, maybe three, I think two. The first is to think about, well, we have a list of goals already. Let's look through those and think about which ones apply to us. You know, Grace is going to pull down SDG 3, which says by 2030, the goal is to end preventable deaths of newborns and children under 5, with all countries aiming to reduce neonatal mortality to at least as low as 12 per 1,000 live births. So we already have a very specific target, right, that her enterprise is definitely trying to address. So you can look at that as a beneficial product, service, or investment, a positive impact. You can also look at things that you're doing that might be causing harm. Are you causing harm to your employees? Are you causing harm to the community? Are you causing harm to someone else in your work in a way that maybe you don't even intend and are not entirely aware of? One of the ways to get to think about this is to do what we call a value chain analysis, where you think of your company, and every company, whether it's a product or a service, can be looked at this way. What do we use as raw materials? Who provides those materials to us? What is the process of doing that? Is it a human rights violation that's going on in our supply chain, or is it okay? What is the process of those materials coming to us? Are there environmental impacts of that? Are there social impacts of that? What does the company actually do? How do we distribute our product or service? How is that product or service used? And then what happens, especially if it's a product, to that product at the end of its life, right? So just considering where are the places in this chain where people are affected, positively or negatively, and which are the ones that we might actually want to manage. So I'm going to stop for a second and ask you to think about this from Grace's point of view. You know enough about her business now, in the 20 seconds that I told you, to think about some possible positive and negative impacts on stakeholders. Can anyone propose any? Raise your hand. Yes.
gauzes to use for birds or any maybe.
Is there a microphone or no? You're just getting them translation. We do have them? Great. Can you come over here? It's hard to get through these circles. You were saying medical supplies like gauze, thermometers,
Or laughing gas. I'm
Laughing
sorry, I don't know
gas.
the medical term for it.
okay?
Or additional baby care products such as any diapers or baby powder, etc.
So is that where's the potential for positive or negative impact in that?
In supplier's part, if we do not have an ethical supplier or a certified supplier, maybe instead of a baby powder, we can get talc, which is actually higher cancerogen and create a childhood cancer.
So we want to know what is the health of the supplies, what is the health benefit or risks of the supplies that we're bringing in, right? So that would be a potential negative impact. Is there a positive one you can think about from that?
It can be reusing some toys maybe or any clothes because babies grow up to clothes easily in a month. So that can be a positive impact.
So repurposing or recycling some of the equipment or toys or other things that we have in the clinic. Great, thank you for that. Anyone else want to add a positive or negative potential impact that they think Grace could manage? I'd love to get one more. Anyone? Yes. Get the microphone because I can't hear you.
Minefields can harm the workers in there if the job conditions is bad.
Excellent.
And that can affect the company's credibility, so stakeholders might affect it because the prices might go low.
That's great. So in almost every company, you have a workforce. And there is an SDG about labor conditions. And so you can almost always ask what he did, which is, are they being treated well? Are they being paid well? Are they being exposed to environmental contaminants, right? What is actually going on with the experience of these employees? And as we're going to talk about in a few minutes, how do we benchmark that against similar employees? And are we doing better or worse than the expectations and norms in this community? So there are two examples. I'm going to give you some more in a minute. Another way of thinking about doing this is to conduct a materiality map. The materiality map is very commonly used now among large corporations. How many of you have seen a materiality map before? Just a few. So the idea here is that you're mapping out what are the issues, the who-what combinations, that are either relevant for financial materiality or stakeholder materiality. Remember this morning we talked a little bit about the idea of single materiality and double? This is the double materiality matrix. To say, is there an issue that defines a material impact that's likely to impact the financial performance of my business? That's one question. If my supply chain has human rights violations and I get fined for that, that could be a material issue, right, on the finance side. The second one is, how material is it to the stakeholders of the business? And that includes my direct, my indirect. As you know, in the environmental chain, we are actually talking about holding companies responsible for their direct impacts on the environment and also the impacts of their supply chain on the environment, right, which are quite indirect. At the moment, when Walmart does its materiality matrix, 60 to 70% of its impact comes from its supply chain because it's buying things from other people and pushing them through. So you're basically taking the issues that you think could be relevant and mapping them by financial and stakeholder materiality. Where do you think materiality maps usually end up looking like? Any guesses of what the pattern you're going to see on most of these is? Financial mostly is what they start with. Were you going to raise your hand? No, I thought. Did you? Someone? I thought I saw movement in this direction. Yeah. You want to answer?
45-degree line.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people end up with a line that kind of goes up like this. They're assuming that the financial and social are going to be somewhat equal. It's actually what they like to do, but that's not actually true. What you find out is there are issues that matter to stakeholders that cost you money, and there are issues that earn you a lot of money that hurt stakeholders. And so this allows you to start to sort by those and say, where do we want to spend most of our time? And there might be some things that cost us money that the stakeholders are on fire and we need to address first. So a materiality matrix doesn't tell you what to do, but allows you to select from a set of issues. I mapped a few for Grace on here, I think. Maybe on one of these, there we go. The map has disappeared, but you can see the things. So she's got her maternal health outcomes, which are both extremely relevant. If you're a pregnant mother, the factor of your child living is extremely important and material to you. And it's also earning them money. We have our workforce. Decent work, extremely important to the people who work here, but it costs us money to pay them more. So we have to make a decision about that. And then I have responsible consumption and production, which is a little bit about what you were talking about at the beginning, which is how do we get and dispose of materials. The community really cares if we put polluted material out of our clinics into the trash, and it affects the water. But we're not going to earn a lot of money from doing that. In fact, it might cost us some money to dispose of our materials well. Do you guys see the differences there? So you're allowing yourself to start to value and make decisions about the priorities for your firm based on stakeholder impacts and financial impacts. If you don't do a materiality matrix, what most companies do is they stick to financial materiality and they miss risks. They miss things that stakeholders can get very upset about. And it can cost them money, but it also can cost them impact. So here is what it ends up looking like for Grace. Her what outcomes, I didn't mention, and I meant to mention, when we did the what shape, it's a square. I'll get back there. The reason it's a square is because all the SDG outcomes are squares, just to remember. And so you want to get to these as the what and who. I'll get back to the table. So we have the SDGs selected over here, what they are: quality health care, increasing access to quality care, reducing workplace accidents, decent wages, responsible medical waste disposal, and we do have some things that are emitting carbon. We have the who are the stakeholders who are actually experiencing the change. You always want to get back to the ultimate stakeholder, the person who is experiencing something, and whether you want to make it better or whether you're making it worse. Pregnant mothers, workers, local environment, planet. And then you use the tools that we just talked about to set some priorities. And here are Grace's priorities. She said, number one is the healthcare access and quality. This is central to our business. She's a social business in a sense, because if they don't produce high quality outcomes for mothers, they shouldn't be in business. Second is our workforce. We need to make sure that our workers have no accidents and are healthy. Third, we want to make sure our staff stays, that once we train them, that they maintain. That's a financial benefit, and it's also a culture benefit that they like what they're doing and are well paid. Fourth and fifth are these two. Of these two, she said, we have more control over how we dispose of our waste than we do right now in emissions. So we're going to put this one a little bit farther up. Does this make sense to everyone? Any questions? So you can do this analysis on any business. You can do it on any organization. And what I'm going to ask you to do, actually, I'm not going to ask you to do it yet. I'm going to talk about ABCs, and then we're going to come back to this because I'm going to ask you to do this for your own organization in a few minutes. Identify some SDGs and think about the what and who for those. But before we do that, I want to introduce the ABCs. ABCs are a set of goal levels that were developed by an organization that has since gone away called the Impact Management Project. They consulted with over 2,000 global practitioners, and they developed these levels. The levels relate to what is the goal of the impact that you're trying to have. Are you trying to avoid harm? That's A. Are you trying to benefit your stakeholders? That's B. Or are you trying to contribute to solutions? That's C. And if you do not know, because you don't have enough information to classify, you are thrown into, we think you're probably, likely, could be causing harm. So for investors who are wanting to convey that their investments are contributing to SDGs, they are often looking at it at ABCs as an important label. And I just want to say these are imperfect, they're in development, but they're very practical. And one of the reasons they're practical is it helps you figure out what kind of data you need to show that you are actually having the impact that you intend. So to think about whether a goal, and this is part of the SDG impact standards, is to use the ABC framework to identify all of your positive and negative material impacts and to set goals. So part of the way that you do this is you want to think about some questions. I'm not going to, these questions are way too small for you guys to see, so I'm actually going to just go to the chart. The chart, what's that? Oh, you, sorry, what? Yes, yes. Okay. Can you turn the microphone on and then ask it again?
It's okay. It's on now.
Yes.
I have a question about the materiality matrix. I mean, how do we do the scoring? I mean, from the perspectives of the stakeholders, do we ask to them, like having a survey with them, or just we assume?
Excellent question. I have a whole deck on that. I will give you the short answer is if you can ask them, you should ask them. And if you can't ask them, you need to rely on research. You need to rely on third-party data of what the norms are in that community and then try to compare yourself to that.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's the really quick answer. So that actually relates to threshold. The threshold is what you're asking about, right? We want to know, the threshold is kind of what's good enough for this stakeholder. In terms of a pregnant woman, what's good enough in terms of her baby surviving? The threshold is really clear, right? We want that baby to survive. In terms of other things, there may be, what's a living wage? There may be different things. And then you're going to say, where is this outcome currently? Is it currently something that the company is doing that is negative? Let's say we're polluting, okay? The outcome in period 1 is below 0. We're polluting. That's negative. And in the next period, we can make it a little bit better. That's a typical A outcome. We are reducing the harm that we are creating ourselves. It is our harm. Our company is doing this, and we can control whether we can bring this up a little bit closer to 0, right, or above. If it's already above and the stakeholder is happy, it's a B. And then C is where you see a lot of social enterprises where you can tell that your peer group is down here. Most of the other health facilities in Grace's communities are not actually having great outcomes. That's why the SDG is there. And she is trying to move that outcome from something that's below the threshold to something that's above the threshold. In this case, the SDG defined the threshold. Do you remember it was 12 deaths per 1,000 births? We know what the threshold is. And the question is, can I get that either a little bit above it for many or a lot above it for a few people? And those are judgment calls. But a C is where you're actually trying to take the status quo and change it to something that is above what we need it to be or what the stakeholder needs it to be. So this is a really high bar for a C-level investment. And so what this has allowed people to do is to differentiate. Most of the time, people are differentiating between A and C because B, we don't actually pay that much attention to, kind of naturally. Is this a harm that the company is producing itself? Is this a harm that the company is trying to dramatically shift in a positive way for an underserved population? Those are the two questions. And the SDG impact standards are completely clear. My students always say, so a C is kind of what you want. I'm like, no. If you have a huge company that moves its negative harm up tremendously here, that might be actually more substantial than a small clinic, you know, serving 200 people a year in South Africa, right? So they're equal. A and C's are just as important, and it depends on what you can get done. You can also use this from an investment point of view, and so here is Akil's portfolio. He's a private equity fund, a VC fund. They're investing in climate change, health, financial inclusion, and education. They went through all of these and said, what do we want our goals to be of our fund? Well, we think the climate change, we're gonna, you know, kind of fund a few things, but we're gonna kind of keep that at a B level. Health, we wanna fund things that are already working. Financial inclusion, we actually think there's a tremendous opportunity for us, and I've seen funds that do this in India. There's a lot of opportunity to get very high growth and very good financial returns out of addressing these two sustainable development goals. And education, we're gonna stay with secondary students where they're already pretty much doing okay. So they have mostly B's and one C. And what that's going to do for them, just as it does for Grace, is it's going to give you a little bit of insight in the kind of data that you need to collect to know that impact is happening. So on the A goal, you're going to compare the investment to its own longitudinal data to see if you've shown movement toward the threshold. And net zero is the perfect example of this, right? We're polluting, and we're going to pollute a little less, and see if we can get to zero. Benefit, we're going to monitor the investee stakeholder satisfaction to ensure we're above the threshold. And in C, you actually have the most data. You need to benchmark what's actually happening. You need to substantiate that you're making it different, and you need to show the outcomes for a specific population. So the other thing that this is allowing you to do is realize you have different data needs depending on the kind of impact goal that you have. And if you don't have any C's, it's not that complicated, but if you have C's, you have to do some things that other people don't do. So we're going to turn this to you. You have a sheet in front of you. I'm going to give you 15 minutes, and I'm only going to ask you to fill out, let me see, I have a sheet with me, to fill out the first 3 columns right now, which is I want you to select some SDG goals, who they are addressing for your organization, and whether you think those are or should be an A goal, a B goal, or a C goal. Do that for yourself for the first 5 minutes, and then take the next 10 minutes and discuss it with your partners that you guys can learn in your groups. And take do you guys have markers there? I hope yes, you do. Write down 1 or 2 combinations of what, who, and ABC that you'd be willing to share with the group. Now, obviously, we have a lot of people in this room. We are not going to be able to share all of them, but this way people can look around later and see what you guys are working on and might be able to connect some common interests. Does that sound good for the next 15 minutes? Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me, we are the interpreters. We are trying to interpret. Can you just
slow down?
keep the pace a little bit down?
Yes, I can.
Please.
I didn't realize.
Because we don't want to miss anything, because
bet.
they're listening to you with all ears.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for asking.
So just a reminder, you have about 5 minutes left if you want to start writing some things on your whiteboard. So I want to check in. How is this going? Good? Okay. Are we ready to do some sharing out? I'm hoping so. Yes.
With regards to like this time span, when we talk about ABC, do we have like a time span of like, for example, we want to avoid harm, but it could be like just a simple action of like not smoking a cigarette
Right.
at the moment, or we could be like planning these.
It's a great question. The SDGs are for 2030, but you can have anything, any time span you want.
That's why we were having discussion of distinguishing which one should we be emphasizing, like AC.
It's a great question. Can I call on you to ask it, to bring it up? Yeah. Okay, we're going to start some sharing and some questions. I'm going to start, do you have a microphone? Over here? We have a question by this woman in blue. Or a comment, question and comment.
Thank you so much for this session. Our question was, we were trying to deliberate on the A, B, C factors altogether, and within that, we were discussing the timeline, the time frame from these actions. So what do we prioritize according to the time frame that we have? Maybe for short-term instances, we might prioritize A, but for maybe long-term instances, it could be C or vice versa. How would we want to act in this regard? Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I wanted her to repeat it for the room. How did you guys interpret time frame? Did anyone think about that? The finish line. So you said if we were perfect, if we got there, here's what it would be. Right, okay. What I said to her when she asked me is I said, well, the SDGs are defined as something you can achieve by 2030, but obviously within an organization, you're probably going to start to set annual goals around the things that you care about, or maybe quarterly goals, right? And so it can become time-bound eventually, but I didn't specify a time for this one. So who would like to share some what, who, ABC combinations for us? I see one whiteboard that has things on it that I can't read from here. Would you like to go first? And then I'm going to ask this team since you put it up. Yeah, go ahead. Microphone, please.
Thank you. We didn't have the time to chat a lot, but we were able to chat like buddies, 2 person at a time. So I'm gonna give one of her ideas. She works in municipality of Çankaya. She works in municipality of Çankaya, and actually they had a great project about helping university students. They provide dinner or suppers for my British audience, and they provide it every weekday, I suppose. Every day, every evening. So we talk about that. So for that, our what is 11.3, which is sustainable urbanization. I'm just going to report it like that. And the third target, which is helping people. What was that? Sorry, I'm just going to take some notes.
Can you guys hear?
Create a sustainable.
Yeah.
Yep. It was the creative participatory capacity, which is actually with this dinner they can easily raise the capacity for university students to give feedback to the municipality. And for that reason, because they're directly providing dinners, we said C, which is contribution to solution.
Fabulous. So we have giving dinners to kids, wanting to increase their participation in certain other things, and we call it a C. Excellent. Can I ask someone from over here to share?
I think the groups are working for the municipalities. We're working for the Bursa municipality at the moment.
Put your microphone extremely close. It's
Our
unnatural.
main SDG aim is the 11th aim, which implies the sustainable cities factor. And our sub-goal that we had defined was 11.7, giving accessibility to the users that are present. The focus group that we had were the children and the women, and that were part of the industry within the cities, and we want to avoid the pollution and the harmful effects of the industries and the cities being interrelated into each other. And our aim is to somehow shift this area to a different and more accessible as well as more friendly, environmentally friendly zone. That this is why we were discussing what should we do first, and that this was our concern altogether. So we were having rich discussions, and then we had a break, and this is what we have so far. Thank you so much.
So did you decide whether that was an A, B, or C goal? Did you have that discussion?
I think it would be yes.
Yeah, B and A.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. Is there anyone from this side of the room who would like to share? Anyone? Anyone? Would you like to share? No? You sure? You have a volunteer I can't see. There you go. Go ahead.
Hello, is this on?
It is.
Our target SDG goal is the 5th one, gender equality in workforce. The way this primarily affects women in developed or developing countries, and the way we are trying to, the causes of this is mainly economical or societal preferences. Sometimes it is not profitable to employ women compared to men, because sometimes men are the cheaper workforce, or sometimes the employer doesn't want to employ women because of cultural or religious reasons. The way we can solve this issue is, in the economical part, government can give regulations and incentives to employ more women or minorities, and in the social part, we can accomplish this by social change or PR and basically social programs.
So what is the what, who, and ABC that you wrote down for that?
Oh, what is, like I said, social inequality in workforce. Who this affects is mainly women in developing or underdeveloped countries like in Africa or Asia. And ABCs, I think this is A category.
Reducing harm from the inequality that currently exists.
Yes, because in countries like, I don't know, China or India, there are women who cannot join the workforce because of societal reasons or economical reasons, and because of this, they cannot educate themselves and educate their daughters, and the cycle continues on. This is an A problem.
So who is the organization that you did this for?
I am sorry?
Whose perspective did you decide this set of actions was coming from? Was it for your own organization? Was it?
I made up a theoretical organization in Bangladesh, a sweatshop place.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. So how many of you found this easy to do? No one? How many of you found this impossible to do? No one? So we're in the middle. What was hard about it for you? What made this challenging? I thought a lot of you were opening up your laptops to look up the SDGs. So first you were like, whoa, wait, what? We have to choose from 17? Oh, there's more than that, right? So there's a little bit of that going on maybe? No. Is it on? Still not on. Can we turn this?
And play. Yeah, okay.
Is it on?
Actually, the difficult part is deciding who is the stakeholder actually, because when I'm doing for my NGO, we have programs like the target group, the focus group is university students, but we are always working with public sector, private sector, other entrepreneurs, and etc. So it's really easy to decide when we are like talking about the university students because we give them like training and etc. But in like when we come part to the public sector actually,
right.
So we
The
don't.
constituents are
yeah,
huge.
I realize we don't
Right.
have any SDG target for public sector. So.
Got it. Yeah. And
It's
university
actually-
students are pretty easy to get to and ask.
Yes.
While the major population and all of its different people.
Yeah,
in it
and
is-
also for the
yeah.
private sector because like
Absolutely.
it's like our SDG target is SDG 8, and when we are talking about the private sector, it's really difficult to find the specific targets for the private
So
sector.
her challenge was getting to the stakeholder that matters for the thing that you're actually doing, which totally makes sense. Other challenges that people had in doing this? Yeah. I'm going to lend you my microphone.
Thank you, Professor. For me, actually, I'm a social entrepreneur, so I usually just say SDG 8, SDG 8. I never look through the targets one by one, like directly if it's not asked by someone. So it was a little challenging to choose which targets under a goal that I was going to root for.
Well, I'm glad you did. I'm glad you looked through them. This is one of the big things that we find companies aren't doing is looking beyond, right, the tile. And you realize that the SDGs are very specific. It's not about education for everyone. It's about education for people who are not accessing education, right? So they're actually very narrow and very focused in some cases. Any other challenges? How about ABC? Was ABC tough? New concept for you. Yeah, in the back. Can we get her a microphone, please?
In my experience, identifying the SDG goal was the easy part, but I could not help myself but think about the different stakeholders that are related with the same SDG. And what I realized during this exercise is that they have different levels of impact. We come across different levels of impact for different stakeholders.
Within the same issue.
Exactly,
yes.
Within the same goal. So I think managing that bit is the most challenging part of it all. And I wanted to raise this with everyone. Thank you.
Great. That's a wonderful learning. Thank you so much. So in a pretty short time, you now have looked through some of the deeper indicators for SDGs. You've thought about how many different stakeholders can be affected. And you've learned a little shortcut to think about what do I need to know about the current level that this stakeholder is experiencing to decide what my actual type of impact might be around that. So that is the wrap for our first step, which is setting strategy, which can take organizations quite a bit of time. We're going to take a 10 to 15 minute break. Let's come back at 2:25 and we'll go through the last 3 steps before we finish. So we're going to move on to the second step, which is integrating. Integrating is how do you put into place the resources, tools, and processes to allow you to actually measure and manage your impact. If you're an enterprise, this involves setting targets for the outcomes that you selected, choosing indicators from across the 5 dimensions of impact, which we're going to go through in a second, and deciding how to track those indicators. And if you're an investor, it's actually integrating this into every step of your investment process, from deal selection through exit. So how many of you have ever heard of the 5 dimensions of impact? A few. You took the course, so that's not fair. You learned before the course, okay. So we just talked about 2 of them. We talked about what and who. The other 3 dimensions are how much, and you usually apply those to the what and who, contribution, and risk. I am not going to go through all of these today. We're going to talk about a few of them. The important thing to remember is that you're basically using your how much to measure, are we reaching the right people, and are they experiencing the right outcome? And the other important thing to know about how much is there's basically two kinds of how much metrics: depth and breadth. Breadth is the one that people usually measure first, which is how many people, how many institutions, how many tons of carbon, right? Those sorts of things that businesses usually measure. The depth is what we usually measure in the social sector, which is how much more did we educate those kids? How much infant mortality did we avoid, right? So the depth is your quality measure, and then you have your scale measure. And you want to make sure you have one of at least both of those categories to know that you're having impact. Contribution is about what are you responsible for? How do you know? And risk is what can go wrong that might keep that impact from happening. I'm going to introduce you to the risk, and I put it on the back of your paper so that you would have it. So there are many types of impact risks, and we've broken these down into three categories for you. The first categories are risks that are related to verifying your own assumptions about what you think is going to be happening. Do you have the right evidence? Did you choose the right factors, the ones that are most material? Did you engage with your stakeholders, or did you not listen to them, or have you not asked them recently enough to know what their experience is? And do you have a strong impact thesis? An impact thesis is, if I do something, then this thing will happen. Everyone has those. Every time you're trying to implement a change, is your impact thesis good or not? There's a risk in all of these if you don't get them right. The second section are risks related to implementation. Did we not actually execute what we said we were going to do? Were those things that we said we're going to do actually inconsistent with our business model and therefore didn't work? Were the actions too costly to implement? Did they not last long enough? Or did we make the impact happen, but then the impact didn't last long enough? Another list of things that can go wrong in terms of the impact occurring. But those are under management's control, and you can tinker and change the way that you're measuring to try to figure out what happened. The last two are the most frustrating. These are risks related to the relevance of your actions compared to other factors that are beyond your control. External risks, such as a pandemic, wreaked havoc with many, many, many enterprises, as you can imagine. And unexpected risks, unforeseen factors that impede your impact. So one of the things that you do is, as a impact measurer and manager, is you want to think about what is the kind of data that I want to get that allows me to figure out what went wrong. I also want to know what went right, don't get me wrong. You definitely want to know what went right, but you also, more often than not, there's going to be things that don't go according to your targets. And you want to use this as a little bit of a magnifying glass to figure out what is the thing that happened and is it fixable. And the other thing that we talk about is, I talked about this morning, turning into a detective, this mindset change that you're trying to collect data that addresses decision making. And we lay out some principles in the training. I'll read these to you. We'll align our impact measurement processes with actionable decisions. 2, we'll align our data quality to decision importance. We're going to collect the data that leads to the most important decisions. 3, we'll consider trade-offs to get good enough data. What do I mean by that? I mean you cannot collect every piece of data on the who that you're targeting and collect every piece of data on their experience. You're going to have trade-offs in what you can afford to collect, and you're going to have to be explicit about those to figure out what's the most important thing at the time. We're going to start in principle 4. We'll start with imperfection and get better. This is not random control trial level perfection. This is a simplification of understanding real causality. This is what can we get away with to make a slightly better decision in the moment. And you have to let yourself off the hook from perfection to do that. And principle 5 is we will strive to collect data across more of the 5 dimensions over time. Now, as you're making trade-offs, you're going to want to collect everything, and then you're going to realize very quickly you can't afford to collect everything. We already had this conversation among some of the groups where someone said it's very easy to identify certain stakeholder groups, and then other ones I realize it's all these different stakeholders and I don't know how to identify them, I don't know how to reach them. But using the 5 dimensions can allow you to make better decisions about what to add over time. So I'm actually I was gonna have you break into groups again, but we are a little bit starved for time, so I'm gonna skip this now and maybe come back. The third step is optimizing. Optimizing is the step that, in my experience, is the most missing from most people's impact management practices currently. And that is because we have a focus in the field on disclosure. I'm just going to take the data in, I'm going to arrange it in a nice report, I'm going to publish it, and I'm done. And what we're saying is, no, this is about using the data internally to make better decisions. If it's just going into a report and it's just going into a drawer, you are not managing impact. You're measuring it, but you're not managing it. So what you want to do here is use the data to figure out what is going on, why, and what can we do about it. And you're going to analyze, at the enterprise level, you're going to analyze that data to understand where performance deviated. It means you have to have a plan. You have to have targets to know whether things deviated. None of your targets are going to be completely perfect or right, but they're directionally giving you information. And then use analysis to make decisions about what you can do about it. And then the same thing for investors. So let me just go through this. These are the 3 questions. I have brought this into every board I'm on. I brought this into my own reporting to my own boss because we were just giving data. We were just being like, here's what we did. That's just activity reporting. And now we are saying, what happened? Why did it happen? And what can we do about it? And it's so simple, but most people aren't doing it. Why did it happen? Comes back to the risks, which is looking through and saying, well, did we conceive of it wrong? Did we implement it wrong? Did something else happen outside of us? You know, what do we need to adjust to go forward? And I seem to be stuck. There we go. So I'm going to show you in a few slides this principle of collecting more data across the 5 dimensions. So remember, we have Grace's clinic. Grace is now comparing 2 of her clinics. Clinic A and Clinic B. And this is the data she's gotten back. Our target for infant mortality is 5%. Clinic A is at 3%. Clinic B is at 5%. Which one's performing better? Why? Say again? They are closer to the target. They bet better than the target. You want infant mortality to be lower, right? Infant mortality is death, so you want that to be as close to 0 as possible. The target was 5, Clinic A is lower. So if we just use our what, it looks like Clinic A is doing better. Let's add another layer of data. Another layer of data is about the who. We have Clinic A is primarily serving urban homes, and Clinic B is primarily serving rural homes. What are you thinking now? Same thing? Any questions? You were shaking your head. Tell me what you're thinking.
Depends on the comparison.
Exactly. So without knowing what the norm is, what do we call it before? The good enough part, the threshold, right? Or the compared to what, the counterfactual, which is the academic word for that. What is the average for urban homes and what is the average for rural homes? We now know we might actually not be comparing apples and oranges. It might be more difficult where? Thank you. Where do you think it's likely to be more difficult to achieve these targets? Urban or rural? Rural, right? Because they may not come to the clinic, they may not want to give birth there, all sorts of reasons. All right, so now we have some baselines. This is our how much. The baseline outcome for this population prior to the clinic opening was 2% in Clinic A and was 6.7% in Clinic B. Which one is doing better? B? Why? You said B. Yeah, it's you. Yes. Yes, the starting point was 6.7, and now they're down to 5, which is better. This one, the starting point was 2, and they're up to 3. It's worse. It's worse. So do you see that the more levels and dimensions of data you have, the more likely it is you're going to be able to interpret the context of the data you have. So this is really important to think about when you are setting up your data structures. Do I have the best what metric? Do I have the best set of who metrics? Are they demographics? Are they other things? And what is the baseline for the population before I even set my target? Notice there's no targets on here. This is just compared to what happened before we got there. And that's already enough. But you could imagine, what if the target we set was, well, this one you're not going to hit the target. What if the target we set was 4, right? Was 4%. Then you would say, well, we didn't quite get to the target, but we still made improvement, right? So it's going to give you a context for analyzing how well you got to things. Any questions on that? I want to make sure you kind of take that in. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, and the last step is reinforcing. Reinforcing your impact. Get there. Is about deepening your governance and accountability for the impact that you're creating, disclosing to different stakeholders. Note that we don't start with disclosure, we start with optimizing, because often there is much more going on than you are going to disclose publicly or even privately. You're going to choose what you need to disclose to different stakeholders. If you are regulated, if you're in an environment where you must disclose certain things, as we were talking about earlier in non-financial accounting, you're going to make sure you disclose those things, but there may be many other things that you're managing internally. And then you're going to learn about, are there any third parties who are verifying these sorts of things? How do we get them to take a look at us and verify that we're doing this in the right way? And we're seeing those sort of third-party verifications and certifications across both the enterprise and the investor environment. I'm going to give you a few other details on reinforce, and then we're going to come back to risks in your worksheets. So what are some of the ways that you can deepen your commitment? These are from the SDG impact standards. You can deepen it in terms of your governance, in terms of making sure that you're accountable for the impacts that you're having. You can revisit your strategy based on the data that you have and the performance that you had. You can revise your performance targets, right? This is actually a cyclical process. Based on what happened, what are our new targets? What are the actions we're going to undertake? And you can change the way that you manage them and how important it is to the people managing them. These are all taken from the Sustainable Development Goals disclosure recommendations, which is available online, and the SDG impact standards. And I have a lot more detail here, but we already did that, so we'll skip that. Deepen your commitment, disclose externally, and seek verification are the 3 steps. And a lot of the time what people are doing is they are trying to think about, what do I put into an impact report? And as you guys know, there's many different, I was just talking over the break with Shafak, who said, you know, we're seeing people kind of rely on sustainability reports. Not all sustainability reports have all of these practices inside them. Here are the things I'm going to just go through for you for the 4 steps. If you're doing this right, if you're actually doing each of the 4 steps, writing an impact report is fairly simple, because you've already put into place the actions that you're going to be reporting on. What we see, unfortunately, and I see this within my student population, they graduate, I teach Masters of Business, they graduate, they go into big corporations, and my student, who is 27 years old, is given the sole responsibility of writing the impact report for the entire company. And the first thing I say is, who are you working for? Are you working for the marketing department? Are you working for the C-suite? Because if you're not working for the C-suite, you're not going to actually be able to address any of the levers that they want to talk about. And they end up going back. I have so many cases of this. They end up going back and starting with set strategy, and it takes about 3 to 5 years to get through to the point where they can report on what they're actually doing. Because it's not actually a marketing exercise, it's an implementation exercise. Under set strategy, all the things that we've already talked about. Which are the issues that have the most impact? Which are the ones that you've decided to actively manage and why? What are the specific SDG targets for this period? How do you classify those as A, B, or C? Under integrating, what are the outputs and outcomes that you decided to measure? Did you set suitable baselines, counterfactuals, and thresholds? What trade-offs did you make between different outcomes or stakeholder groups? What processes and operations are included in your impact management system? Under optimize, this is the, as I said, this is the red flag one where I look, if I'm looking at any impact report, I want to see here, how has performance compared to projections over the time period? Last year, I looked at 10 major company impact reports. Only one of them, Nike, had their targets, and they had little green arrows and little red arrows. I love that. I love seeing where did you do well, where did you not do well, and having that be explicit. Did you compare performance against baselines and thresholds? What explanations are there for your performance deviations? What went wrong? If it's a public report by Nike and they have a little red arrow on it, you can be very well sure they've explained why. Right? That's a good thing. What actions did you decide to take to improve performance? What risks remain? And how will you recalibrate your goals based on what you've learned? And then the reinforce we've already talked about. The SDG impact standards ask that you comply with the Sustainable Development Goal disclosure recommendations that we talked about, that you implement reporting mechanisms to meet the needs of the stakeholders, that you make public your policies concerning human rights. And I can't get to the next one. Don't know why. There we go. And you comply with relevant laws and regulations around disclosures. So I'm actually going to stop there, and I want to go back to risks before we finish up. And I want to, let's see, go back to risks where we were, because we do have a little time. What I want you to do in your groups, and I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do it, is that I want you to go through the what, who, and ABCs that you identified, and I want you to identify what you think the top 2 or 3 risks are from the back of the sheet for the impact goal that you identified earlier. Is it the first type of risk, the second, you can do them by number. They're, I think, did I number them on the sheet? I get it. 1 to 11, great. So I want you to go through and think about what are the most significant risks that can happen to this particular outcome. And then in the last column, what is a potential action I would take if it turned out that I didn't perform and I thought this risk was happening? What is the mitigating thing that you would want to measure or do to improve this? And I know this is very, very high level because you guys are thinking about many different kinds of organizations and many kinds of interventions, but I want to just get you to practice thinking about risks and actions. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll share some highlights together.
opportunity to speak at this very important event. My name is Andrea Serra, and I'm the Chief Market Development Officer at the International Foundation
going to give you 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes, and then we're going to share out. Okay, it's about time. You guys look very engaged in your conversations, which is wonderful to see. Is there anyone who would like to share how they thought about impact risk for their SDG and what they thought about in terms of mitigating that risk? Yes. Are you a volunteer, or is he volunteering you? Would you like to go? Can we have a microphone, please? And put it really close to your mouth. Really close. Unnaturally close.
Okay. Is it enough?
That's good.
Actually, I also choose a hypothetical firm, such as not a firm, but a funding authority, maybe. And my target was 9th SDG as industry, innovation, and infrastructure.
Okay.
Yes, and I was focusing on SMAs, on their innovation capabilities, and my risk was about, actually, sorry. First one was stakeholder engagement, because I thought maybe my target groups was not ready to have innovation priorities. Instead, like they might have economical problems in their organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So it might it might affect the impacts. Maybe they cannot align with it. Also, it might be about the evidence, like in the first place, if we don't know our audience, so also the cultural or economical reasons or their statement, like their now their current stabilities need to evaluate before the
Before they can think about being
yeah,
innovative.
before the planning all of it.
Great.
And my mitigation advice might be the close, engaging with the stakeholders.
Engaging with the stakeholders more closely.
Yeah, like to get to know them, what drives them to be innovative or what motivates them. Yeah.
That's great. So can I recapture that and tell me whether I caught it? Because I'm not sure everyone could hear it. I want to make sure. You are working with small to medium-sized enterprises around innovative practices.
Yeah.
That's SDG 8 or 9?
9.
9. And what you were saying is you think some of the biggest risks are stakeholder risk and evidence risk, and your mitigation would be to listen to them and talk to them about what they are going through in their organizations to be sure they're ready to add innovation on or to use innovation as a way to solve their current stability or financial problems. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Fabulous. Well done. Anyone else? Yeah. Again?
I'm lucky I got 2 microphones this time. For mine, I choose the goal 8, target 6, which is lowering the net, which is not in employment, education, or training. That means unemployment usually. So my who was unemployed youth, and I go through my statements, especially my if-then statement for impact thesis. I said, if we get more businesses, we can lower our youth unemployment. I'm so sorry, it's a hard word for me. But if we check some data, some of the cases this doesn't work. Usually when we start new businesses, they try to poach or headhunt from other companies, then look for new talent. Or maybe we can get more businesses and get some of the new people in it, but after a while, because we're just looking for the employment part, don't giving any training or education, project may stall for 9, drop-off.
Drop-off risk?
Yeah.
And is that your largest risk, drop-off, or are there other ones?
Drop-off and impact thesis.
And both, impact thesis, got it. And what would you do to mitigate? Did you have any actions or metrics that you'd want to put in place to see if that was going to happen or know if that was happening sooner than later?
To have, for impact thesis or for my if-then statement, to have an incentive to make them do it, or signing a proposal so they will have to do it. For drop-off, it can be mitigated by executing a bigger batch of new businesses. We will continue to getting new businesses because even daily there's new business ventures. Today I took lots of notes about new ventures we can use just for impact investing.
Great, thank you very much.
Merci.
Let's hear from some others. Is there anyone in the back of the room? I've heard a lot of people in the front. Is there anyone in the back of the room who would like to share how they thought about risks? There is, there you go. The middle of the room, that counts. Sure.
Excuse me, I can't remember some English words. Please excuse me.
Sure.
I am talking somebody, and we are thinking a lot of, and I think first risk is the company, if doesn't know where it positions, which SDG, and now where it nerede? Evet. Nerede konumlandığını bilmiyorsa sıkıntı. Yes.
Got it.
I think they were first they study SWOT, past, and other things. They know, they can know which SDG and how do they do SDG for their company.
Got it. So not knowing how to
Yes.
select and
Yes.
integrate.
I think this is a big risk.
I do too. That's why I'm here. Yes. Thank you for that one. I appreciate it. Anyone else? Yes. Microphone over here. Here.
Actually, I have a question. When we are talking, like, we realize, like, we're all working in an NGO, and when we went back to the ABC, we realized, like, we jumped directly to the conclusion, so we have to work to contribute to the solution. So I realized, like, we missed the part, like, as an NGO, is it possible for us to work, like, to avoid harm or benefit stakeholders? So I realized I'm not sure the difference, actually.
Got it. Got it. So your question, can I restate it just to make sure everyone heard it? Her question is, we realized that we all work in NGOs and that we jumped very quickly to C's, thinking that we needed to contribute to solutions. And her question is, as NGOs, should we be thinking about A's and B's? Is that right?
Yeah.
So the question is, who are you trying to influence as the NGO? There are NGOs that influence communities and individuals in those communities. There are also NGOs like SDG Impact who influence companies. And so, or influence an actor who is causing harm. So it depends what your own thesis is as a,
Yeah, we're working with children, teachers,
you're working
and
with children and so on.
Yeah.
So then the question is, if you're working with, for example, a school system where that school system is underperforming, you could be doing an A or a C, depending on whether you're making that performance go above what you need it to be or not.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
And one short question too. In case of the risks, actually, like when we are talking about the stakeholder engagement, so it can be also a risk, like as we are an NGO, but we are working with a company because they funded us, and we are working with the marketing department, as you mentioned before. So that
So
part
how is that a risk? If you're working with the marketing department of a company,
Yes.
how are you defining that as a risk to be
Yeah, it's
mitigated?
actually a risk because like intended impacts probably are different.
Okay, so
Right.
you might have different goals than that organization. So a
Okay.
misalignment with your stakeholders is the risk.
Okay, I get it.
Does
Thank
that make
you.
sense?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Okay, great. Anyone else want to share? Thought I saw, yes, I did see a hand. Thought it was you, but it was her.
Hi, first of all. So our SDG goal and target was the third one. It's about like mental health and well-being. And like who are we going to like do this is our employees, because like throughout the pandemic, like everyone has like some mental issues and some less motivation while working in a company. So actually like online, getting a psychological education or like something like this will benefit employees throughout their like working process. So the impact risks may be 5, 7, and 8, which are execution, which actions may not occur because in actually like some firms, employees may not want to describe like everything throughout the firm.
Exactly, they might feel that their privacy is more important.
Yeah, privacy in the firm. 7, efficiency. Actions are too costly to implement because, we all know that. I mean, getting a personal, like, psychological help, it's sadly, like, so costly. And the last one, endurance. Actions don't last long enough to know if the impact occurred. So, if the firm is not getting so much money, it may not, like, provide the same help to his employees throughout like so much time. These are.
And how would you mitigate those risks? What kind of data would you want to collect or actions would you want to take?
We thought maybe we can make some surveys about the help, like how's it going, or like did you feel any change throughout the process? And we may like collect these datas. And then,
And then see what they tell you
Yeah.
and react to it. That's great. So I love the idea of you know, if you're working with a company and you're trying to improve the mental health of those employees, making sure that you're doing interim touch points with the stakeholders who are actually getting those services. I think there's a tendency to be like, oh, we gave it to them, we're done.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
So that's a fabulous,
For
a
sure.
fabulous way of thinking about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
For sharing
Thank
it.
you.
Anyone else like to share? Such great examples across different fields. Anyone? Anyone?
We can share if...
I heard a we. Okay, there we go.
Our problem stake was relocating people from an industrial zone to a new zone under our SDG of sustainable cities. What we tried to do as a group is try to look at three different, try to find a solution to the three different categories. So we have three different examples that we wanted to demonstrate. The first of which that we thought was important is stakeholder engagement, because our main risk here is the resistance of the people from moving from one location to the other location.
Sure.
And to mitigate this, we had proposed to make on-site surveys and interviews with the participants to understand their fears, resistance, and try to change the mindset with regard to the move or the change that they are fearing at the moment. So that would be one case that we have. And accordingly, understanding their own dynamics to engage them within each other as such. So this was one of our mitigation approaches. Our second category was with regards to efficiency and lack of finance. And in this regard, because we are working for the municipality, we want to look at different sponsorship programs and other maybe subsidies that might be supported by government or other institutions. So looking at different financing sources, maybe different calls that would be provided either maybe through European Union funds or other different World Bank funds, etc., that would be supporting this would be among our mitigation approaches. And lastly, unexpected, under the category of unexpected, especially because municipalities work through a certain season or a certain time frame, when the people in command change, there's a risk of the project not following through.
Yep.
So accordingly...
Which is another form of drop-off risk.
Yes.
You actually have inherent drop-off risk, right, in
yes.
your cycle.
Yes, yes, definitely. So to mitigate this change of plan or deviation of plan, because the timeline might shift or the priority might shift, we want to initiate this form of action by trying to engage the society and first raising social awareness. So if they are in demand of this, if the society in itself is in demand of this, then the people that are part of the municipality are more open to hearing their voice and acting upon this. So these were our suggestions. Thank you.
Wonderful job. Thank you all for sharing, and thank you all for doing this exercise, those of you who haven't shared. We're nearing the end of this session, and as I said, my goal here was to give you a taste of all four steps and to let you wrestle a little bit with some of the dimensions, and that's not really going. Some of the, can you guys, I'm not able to flip the slide.
Slaytları, bir sonraki slide.
Do you want the next one? I'm trying to get to the next one. It's not moving.
It's coming, it's coming.
He has to pull it up every time. Yeah. Okay. We'll get there. We'll get there. There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that. So I just wanted to leave you with, and we can take a few minutes for questions in case there are a few, but we went through kind of what all of the different steps entail. So you have an overview of that. You have a little bit of a sense of how to break down your goals into what and who, and how to think about risks. And realizing, of course, that these four steps are not year. It's actually a cycle. It's a cycle where you make some hypotheses about what you want to do, you get some data in, you figure out what you think is going on, and then you start again. And you figure out what is the key to really robust impact management is setting up a process that can go on without you having to push to make it happen. So that it is a consistent cycle of doing, trying, getting feedback, and deciding what the next best action is. And you can imagine there are all different risks. There's many different ways that impact cannot go as expected. But if you're paying attention to it and you've put these processes in place, you're much more likely to learn what's happening in whatever domain you're working in. So thank you so much for joining me for this workshop this afternoon. If we do have time for Q&A, I'm happy to do that. If you think it's too much time, we're happy to do it later. We're done for now. I'll be around if you want to ask anything. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Katie, we are grateful that you're here and you shared your expertise here with us. Sorry to interrupt, just jump in.
Sure.
So we were so lucky to have her today. She's teaching this at Duke University. Today she taught it to you. And I hope you made most of it. Thank you so much, Kathy.
You bet.
Dear guests, the workshop session is over. Now we have 30 minutes break.